Holland and Wolff built Staten Dam on slipway number 3 as yard number 436. Her keel plates were laid down in 1912, and she was launched in July of 1914. However, the First World War broke out on the 20th of July, and Great Britain would join not long after. Construction on the Staten Dam for Holland America would slow down as Holland and Wolff would focus more on their war-related issues. But since her construction was already well advanced, she could be completed to be used for military service. In 1915, the British government would acquire the incomplete ship and would offer her to Cunard, who prior had lost the Lusitania in May of 1915. The ship would be given the name Justicia to fit with Cunard's policy to name ships with IA as an ending. But Cunard cannot get a complete crew to operate her, so she would be offered to White Star Line, who happily gave her a complete crew, and thus would operate under White Star Line for the time being. However, White Star Line would not add the IC at the end of their name like all other White Star Line ships. She would be painted in all gray and registered under Liverpool. White Star Line would use the Justicia across the North Atlantic for troop transporting. During early 1918, the Justicia would be painted in a dazzle camouflage. In January of that year, the Justicia is attacked in the North Channel by a torpedo fired by a U-boat, but the torpedo would miss her and she would not get damaged. After this attack, however, in July of 1918, the Justicia would leave Belfast for New York with a military escort. She would be attacked by a torpedo off the coast of Scotland, where a U-boat would fire 5 torpedoes. Most of them would miss her, only 2 of them would hit the Justicia. One of them would hit her, but her bulkheads would allow her to stay afloat. The other one did not go off. Her crew would be partially evacuated and she would be towed by a tug for the remainder of the voyage. The Justicia would survive the war, much to the amazement of her owner. Weeks after the war, White Star Line would relinquish operating her, and she would be given back to Holland America Line, who would rename her the Staten Dam, giving her a new paint scheme, and would undergo the reinstallation of decorations that had been removed following the start of the war. The Staten Dam would begin transatlantic routes from Rotterdam to New Jersey. In November of 1923, the White Star Line would provide a hefty sum of money towards purchasing the Staten Dam to be a replacement for the lacking RMS Homeric. The Staten Dam would be renamed the Cedric and her port of registry changed to Liverpool. Most of her interior fittings would be changed. Some decor from the Britannic would be placed onto her. Her grand staircase would somewhat resemble a watered-down Olympic-class staircase. She'd begin transatlantic voyages from Southampton to New York. The early 20s would prove profitable for the White Star Line. For example, the RMS Olympic would represent the old money type of traveler. The RMS Majestic, now the flagship, would be for the new money, or in other words, the adventurous. And finally, the Cedric, which would have appealed to the immigrants from war-torn Europe. The immigrant waves post-World War I would be widely profitable for the White Star Line and for other lines. The Cedric would be named by immigrants the ship to heaven. Overall, the Cedric would be a comfortable choice for immigrants with her sleek refit and overall good passenger accommodations. However, the late 20s and the 30s would not be kind to the Cedric. Despite modernization refits to her wireless operating system and her passenger accommodations, the immigrant trade had mostly died out. Not to mention, in June of 1926, she would have a collision with the SS Pittsburgh. The Cedric would hit head-on onto the Pittsburgh's midship, killing 6 people almost instantly. For a brief second, the Cedric's bow would act like a plug against the water, but it wouldn't last. The Cedric would remain afloat, but the Pittsburgh would take on immense water. 24 minutes later, the Pittsburgh would roll onto her side and slowly settle on the water. The captain of the Cedric, Warren T. Griggs, would begin to prepare rescue efforts for the Pittsburgh, whilst also ordering distress calls to be sent on behalf of the Pittsburgh. After the rescue had concluded, she would make her way for New York. The Cedric would arrive in New York under her own power and drop off the Pittsburgh survivors. She would be sent to Harland and Wolff for major repairs. By the end of 1927, a new bow had been constructed for the Cedric, and she would remain in her regular service once more. In 1931, the Cedric would offer cruises for the White Star Line, such as in the Mediterranean, the North Sea, and in the Caribbean. The Cedric would continue running cruises for the White Star Line along with the Laurentic and the much older Adriatic. The Great Depression would hit White Star Line hard with the scrapping of the Cedric and the Baltic. The Laurentic, Cedric, and Adriatic were kept more as reserve ships for either cruising or temporary trading vessels. The Cedric would serve as a trading vessel briefly in 1929, then go back to cruising. In 1934, the Baltic is sold for scrap, and that same year, along with the reliable RMS Olympic. White Star Line would now merge with Cunard. Cunard would be a large shareholder in the merger with White Star Line. It would now seem incredibly obvious that the once great White Star Line would go out as a whimper. The Cedric's future would look further bleak as the years go on. By 1939, Cedric and 2 more profitable ships would be left under the White Star Line. These 2 ships would be the Georgic and Britannic. In 1939, war would break out. The Admiralty would requisition the remainder of the White Star Line fleet. The Cedric would be in Cuba by that time, so after delays of their departure, she would leave for Havana for her requisition. September 6th, the Cedric would be not far off from Ireland, where she would be attacked by U-99. 3 shots would be fired at her, one of them in her stern, which would be bad enough to rupture the watertight door mechanisms, and 2 others would strike amidship. Overall, the Cedric's integrity would be compromised, and she would begin sinking by the stern. Captain George Simmons oversaw the evacuation. Lifeboats would be lowered, and a distress signal is sent out. The Georgic, who was on her way back from New York, would respond to the distress call. Meanwhile, photographs would actually be taken of her going down. Once her boat deck would begin to touch the water, the sinking process rapidly accelerated. The ship would sink in only 26 minutes. Overall, the sinking would claim over 900 lives. It would be one of the first maritime disasters in World War II. The MV Georgic would be the one to rescue the survivors of the disaster.